turn off your...
Okay, right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andy Otway-Sal, head of our in-house council services, which range from a tiny employment team to a large supported living team, our day services, residential care home, older people's service, and mascot care. But today, yes, we're talking about supported living. Angela Wardell is actually going to be doing most of the talking because she is supported living manager, has spent a lot of her career actually delivering service to people in the borough. Angela's going to talk about the different services that we have here in Merton living, and I think what that will show is the different types of living in terms of geographically where they are, size of supported living, nature of support that can be given. Living, like anything, is not a fits-all, one-size-fits-all service by any means. So, and one of the things that will cover is, I know that a lot of carers over the years asked, what is the difference between residential care and supported living? And Keith is going to touch on that when he gives his talk about what our future intentions are in terms of commissioning further services. But by talking about the services that we currently provide, some of those things will come up. So thanks for coming, a lot of you apparently, so that's good. And I'm going to pass over to Angela and I'll just chip in. I'll be available for questions.
Angela, you're muted. Angela, we can't hear you. You just need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, the screen was changed and I couldn't find the button. So I'll start again. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see so many people here. I'm Merton's Independent Living Manager. So I manage, as well as supported living, mascot telecare and Gleeblands, which is an extra care site. So we have a wide range of people across our services from all ages of adulthood, basically. And mascot and supported living, it's a really nice combination because it means we can look at the technology side of things and how we can encourage independence and support independence, bringing together people and technology. So, but today we're talking about supported living service. So if we can go to the first slide, thank you. Thank you. So our background was, we were basically at an old residential home that was Hazelmere Avenue, which has now been redeveloped into a supported living site. So the first picture you saw, that is the new Hazelmere. The old Hazelmere was set up as a training centre back in the early 80s, I think, and it wasn't really fit for purpose. So a decision was made to close that site, redevelop it, and to start the supported living service, which then started in October 2007. We're in quite an unusual situation, as there was nothing available in the borough. We were literally starting from scratch. The whole team, the staff, the office, the service users all moved to Jolly Close in Mitcham, which is where we started supported living. It was a really interesting, it was a very busy time, but a really, really interesting time. And I think it stands out to me how easy it is to make assumptions about people and to decide you know someone really well. And I was guilty of this, and I speak about this often. And I think probably one of the most rewarding sides of supported living is seeing people that you've known for years, who you thought had maximised their potential, actually just blooming and doing everything that you thought they probably wouldn't be able to do. And I think there's always this question about what's the difference between residential and supported living. It isn't an easy answer because lots of residential homes are very different. At the old Hazelmere, we thought we were very forward thinking. We gave people lots of choice, lots of independence, but that was nothing in preparation for what we were able to support people with once we became supported living. And I think having your own front door key, having your own flat, it changes the way people feel about their lives and the choices they can make. It empowers people to think they can live the same lives as everyone else and they've got the same opportunities as everyone else. And we really genuinely saw that happen with the clients that we work with, of all levels of ability, to be honest. And perhaps the people we were most surprised about are the people that we thought might struggle. So we started at Dolliff, and that quickly expanded, and we took on, as more flats became vacant, we took on more clients, and that was very successful. We were really happy with how things had gone. But then Clarion Housing, who then owns that site, decided that site was closing for redevelopment. And so we moved to the Gables, which is another site in Mitcham. Over the years, we've now extended, we've gone back to Hazelmere. So we've now got 3 sites in the borough. I think the real concern about supported living sometimes, and you've heard these stories in the press over years, that people are putting their own flat in the middle of nowhere or the middle of a council estate. They see someone once a week, they're lonely, they're isolated, they're scared at times, and people have understandably real concerns about that. The sites we managed have got staff around 24 hours a day, so we have waking night as well as day staff on site. And I think the importance of that is you have a lovely balance between people's autonomy and making choices to have staff around to support people to do what they want to do and when they want to do it. And we found that works really well. We do have a couple of people that do live in their own flats that we've worked with over the years. They were in a 24-hour service and have gained so much independence, they now live independently. Because we've had that contact with them, it also means they've got emergency numbers. We attach them basically to one of the other 24-hour sites. So they've got someone around to ring in an emergency if they've got a problem. They've got that contact if they need someone around. We did do a little bit more of that. We're not doing quite so much of it at the moment, but it has been a successful model for the people we've worked with. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit more information about having your own flat and what that's meant for people. So next slide, please. Thank you. So generally for our clients, most of them have a tenancy. The people at the Gables have a license. The most important, you've got your own front door key, it's your flat. And you've got legal protection for living in that flat, which is a big difference from residential, because residential, there are not really any legal protections to you being at that site. You could be given a week's notice and be asked to leave. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but it can happen. People can have their flat how they want it. They've got their own cooking facilities. They can kind of get up when they want, go to bed when they want. Obviously, if there were concerns around that, we'd work with people to manage lifestyle choices, etc. It does also come with responsibility because it is a legal document, a license or a tenancy. So that can be quite daunting for someone that's never experienced that before. So staff are very skilled and experienced supporting people managing their tenancy. And we work very closely with our housing partners to make sure we kind of manage that properly and we don't put anyone's tenancy at risk. And we've got very close working relationships with all our housing partners. So one of the main focuses in supported living is learning daily living skills. I mean, residential, you often have kind of house rules, and the whole point of supported living is treating the person as an individual. So one of our main focuses when someone moves in and all through their time with us is risk assessment of that individual. So cooking, managing money, travel, all those things we look at once someone first moves in, and we keep that, it's a living document, it's dynamic, we keep it updated. And everyone has a key worker who they work with. And the important thing is that we work to develop those daily living skills. So someone learning to cook a meal independently, that could be boiled egg, it could be jacket potato. It's about celebrating someone's development as they go along. And believe me, there's such satisfaction in seeing someone do something for the first time and going to college by themselves for the first time. It's great to see that happen. So going to the local shops by yourself. You may not be able to go to Wimbledon because you're a little bit nervous about crossing roads or getting the train or a bus, but you could go up to the local shops and get a couple of little bits for your tea and come back again. We've got quite a lot of people at college. We've even had people going out to work or doing voluntary work in the past. Financial choices. I think everyone would agree for anyone to have true independence, there has to be some financial autonomy. It can be tricky, and I understand people's anxiety about someone having their money. What I'm not talking about is everyone just gets handed their money. It goes back to our risk assessment process. So we sometimes have people with 2 accounts, one that they don't have much access to and one that they do have access to, so we can support them with budgeting, and they've got money available to them to spend if they go down the shops. We do have some people with very complex issues who do have full support staff to manage money. Some people have Merton as their appointee, so we liaise closely with that team. But it is important that people have got access to their money, because it's a very important part of our job to teach people budgeting. And without access to that money, we can't do that, because we need to know what people's income is, what their benefits are. We need to be able to show people setting up direct debits and work out what their outgoings are. And without that in place, it hinders us really, and the person learning that skill for the first time. And let's be honest, when we all left home, learning how to budget was a pretty important part of finding our independence. It can take, so some people, they pick it up really quickly. For other people, they need lots more support ongoing. But we have various ways. We have prepaid cards that we use. We have separate safes that people can access. So we have a variety of ways that are very individually based, but supporting people to manage their money. So I'm going to go on now to talk about the different sites. Thank you. So the Gables, this is based on Tamworth Lane in Mitcham, just down from Eastfield train station. We've been at the Gables a couple of times, but it most recently reopened in October 2017. Each of the flats have a kitchenette and a bathroom, and there are 9 flats there. The site there has our most communal space, really. So we've got quite a large general use room, which has a kitchen in that we can cook in and do group meals in. And it tends to be where the parties are, not in the last 2 years, obviously, or the garden, where that kind of stuff happens. We've also got a TV lounge, and very luckily, actually, and usually we've got a sensory lounge, which is very well used and certainly been very helpful for people during lockdown. The service users have access to shared laundry facilities and, as I say, a communal garden. The aim of the Gables is as a transition from children's service or the family home. We found, despite people, people's ages are almost irrelevant in that situation. So someone coming from children's services, or someone that might have lived home with mum and dad for a long time, the nervousness they might feel of moving to a new placement, the skills build is just as important for someone who may be 50 as it may be 16 or 17. So we have most people at the Gables are younger people. We do have some more mature people at the Gables too, and actually the mix of people, they're really nice. They're all very good friends. They got on really well, and the age difference really doesn't matter. And the purpose for the Gables really is for assessment and the development of daily living skills in preparation for moving on. Okay, if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So here's some pictures of the Gables. There's some pictures of flats and also some pictures. It does say at the bottom 2015, but believe me, I did just update this. So some of those pictures are basically lockdown and after lockdown. So after being locked up for so long and indoors, it was really nice to get people out and about, and clients and staff both really enjoyed being able to go out and do things. That said, staff did an amazing job, and hopefully some of you have seen Partnership News, an absolutely amazing job of keeping people busy and occupied indoors. There were times where we had a full lockdown, and that was really difficult for people. But I'm not sure I can express really how proud I am of what people achieved during that time. I was with one of my colleagues last night, and she also said that she was really proud thinking about what they'd done during that time, and how important it was, not just for clients' morale, but also for staff morale, to have that time together and do some fun things together and actually enjoy spending time, even at social distance with masks on, still being able to enjoy some fun times. So that's the Gables. The flats are nice. They're much larger than they previously were. It is only a kitchenette, so that it is limited in the cooking that can be done, but we do have a communal kitchen that people can do. So if we can move on, I think it's Hazelmere next. Yep. So Hazelmere is our smallest site, so that's 8 beds in total. It's more of a longer stay site, and it's probably it's probably the closest you get to a group living setting, so a sort of small care home in how it feels for people. We've got a variety of people there. We have some older people, we have some younger people. It's basically 2 houses, and it's got 4 flats in each side, and it's got an office block in the middle, 2 offices, one up, one down, and staff can access both sides by interconnecting doors. There's also 2 communal rooms. The picture you can see there is one of the communal rooms that leads out to the garden, and it's got a shared laundry and 2 shared gardens, 2 really large gardens actually. You'll see some pictures of that in a minute. So that again has large bathrooms. All the bathrooms are wheelchair accessible, and then it is another kitchenette. So we are restricted again with the cooking that can be done in the flats, but there is cooking facilities in both communities. What's the next slide? Thank you. And this is Hazelmere. So Hazelmere is a little bit famous for its Halloween parties. Again, we've not been able to do that for the last 2 years. And most of the pictures at the top there are the 2 communal rooms. The pictures in the middle of the gardens, we're really lucky with the size of the garden at Hazelmere. They're huge. And one has, you can just about see it, but that wooden building at the side there, that's actually a bar, a garden bar. And then the bottom pictures, there's some of the flats you can see, and some general celebrations, birthday celebrations in the middle. Okay, we can move to Dolliff, please. So Dolliff is owned by Clarion Housing, and this site's situated on Bond Road, just opposite Asda, for anyone that knows Mitcham. This site opened in 2015. So this was the site we went to in 2007 and was closed and redeveloped. They've made a lovely job of the redevelopment. They are huge flats. We have 18 flats there. We all wanted to move in when we went to see them. They've got winter gardens and balconies. There is no communal space at Dolliff apart from the shared garden, but people have much bigger flats there. Most of the people at Dolliff are slightly more independent, although we do have people that who have quite complex needs there. People tend to socialise in their flats, and in the summer we use the garden, although during lockdown we use the garden generally for get-togethers anyway. It's situated over 3 floors, and there's a lift access to all floors. And as I say, the flats have 4 facilities, so it's a full functioning kitchen, accessible bathroom, and a balcony or winter garden, or access to the garden. Tenants at that site have a tenancy and are supported to manage that by staff, as I said earlier. If we can go to the, thank you. Okay, so this is Dolliff, and most of these pictures were actually taken during lockdown, which is particularly impressive. But the one with everyone sat together, I should add, was taken once we come out of lockdown, and obviously the football was after lockdown. But the themed parties, every week people were coming up with a theme. So we had Italian Week, we had the Dolly Olympics, we had Wild West Week, and the thought of that was people did some art around that. We did cooking all week around those particular ideas. And then on Friday there was a get together where people had shared a big meal and spent some time together, and that worked really well for everyone, and I think probably kept everyone going at Dolliff. Because it's such a big site, it's very difficult to keep everyone happy and make sure everyone's okay. It's a really good way of bringing everyone together and keeping that community spirit going. You can see a picture of the flats, some of the flats there, and as I say, it's difficult to catch that on camera, but they are very large flats, separate bedroom, a very large bathroom, and then a kitchen. It's also quite clever in that the doors, you can kind of make it much more open plan, or you can close it off as separate rooms. So the whole design there has been very good. The whole flats are very light. It's ceiling to floor windows, and yeah, it was really lovely to see how people have settled there. Okay, last question. So any questions? But I don't know if you want to do questions yet or to Keith first, so I'll leave that up to you.
Tina, can you stop sharing the slide, please?
Okay, thank Thank you, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So obviously, Angela and Andy have talked about our in-house supported living provision. What I'm now going to talk about is the wider externally provided, externally commissioned provision, and what we're intending to do for the future. And I hope that as I go through my presentation, I'll answer at least some of the questions that have come up in the chat, and then can obviously pick any up in the question and answer session that follows. So just so that everyone who doesn't know me is aware of who I am, I'm Keith Burns. I'm currently the Interim Assistant Director for Commissioning in Community and Housing. Interim doesn't mean that I'm temporary. I'm a permanent employee of Merton. I'm head of commissioning ordinarily, but I'm acting up currently, which is why I've got the interim bit in front of my title. And I should also out a couple of my colleagues who are in the audience, just so that you're aware that they're in the audience. So Heather, who lots of you will know, who's one of our commissioning officers, and Godfrey, who's our commissioning manager, is also in the audience today, and they'll both be very closely involved in the future work that we do that I'm about to describe. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully
Yes, you would. We did one this morning.
Can people see my presentation?
We were asked to do them every morning.
Yes, we can, Keith.
Great. Okay. And that should now be full screen. So as I said, what I'm going to talk about is our future plans for arranging external providers to provide supported living provision in the borough. But what I thought it might help to start with is just some basic statistics, some data about the current situation. And I should say that these numbers are probably not completely accurate as of today, because we have people coming and going from residential care and supported living pretty regularly. But these give you a broad indication of the current situation. There are currently, in terms of residential care, there are currently 15 homes in the borough. 2 of those are in-house Merton provision. And across those 15 homes, there's a total number of beds of 106. And the current occupancy is 83. So that leaves current vacancies of 23. So you can see that there's quite a gap in terms of the total number of available residential care beds in the borough and the number that are currently filled. And I'll come on in a couple of seconds on my next slide to talk about where people who live in Merton are placed, either in Merton or out of borough. But this is the residential homes in the borough, and as I say, the total occupancy and vacancies. And then in terms of supported living, and I know there were some questions in the chat about this. So again, we've got 15 schemes in the borough, including the 3 in-house that Angela's just done such a good job of describing. And across those 15 schemes, a total number of beds of 96. And that reflects the fact that a number of those schemes are quite small, particularly the independent sector external provider schemes, because they may be 3 or 4 bed houses with 3 or 4 bed spaces, 3 or 4 bed spaces. And the current occupancy across those 96 beds is about 80. That always has to be a bit of an estimate, and I'll explain why in a second, but that leaves about 16 vacancies. And I should also say that there is one scheme that is a 6-bed scheme that is currently empty. So if you took that out of the equation, actually we'd have a total number of beds of 90 with 80 occupied. So I think what that shows is that while there is some capacity in the supported living sector within the borough, actually there isn't a huge amount of capacity. So there's about 10 active vacancies, and that compares with a higher number of vacancies, a higher proportion of vacancies in residential care. And there are probably a couple of reasons for that. One is that Residential care tends to be more specialist, so different schemes will have particular specialisms. So it's not actually that unusual for a residential home to carry a vacancy for maybe a number of months, because it will take time for the right referral to be made in terms of fitting in with the existing residents and so on. That's less of an issue in supported living because people have their own front doors, as Angela has described, people have their own flats. So there's less likely to be a kind of a long gap in vacancies in schemes. They're likely to be filled more quickly. But that shows you that the overall position for the borough is that there's in a sense, a higher demand for supported living and resulting in a lower number of vacancies. So that's the position in Merton. And one of the important things to remember about that position is that some of those 83 in residential homes in the borough, some of those 80 in supported living schemes in the borough will actually have come from other boroughs. They won't be Merton residents. So we might have people from Lewisham or Wandsworth or Richmond or wherever it might be living in schemes in the borough. So if I now turn to where do people from Merton live in residential care and supported living. So again, these aren't completely up-to-date figures, but they're roughly, and they're pretty up-to-date, and they give you a good idea of the current picture. So in terms of residential care, we are currently, as a borough, supporting 125 people in residential care placements. 43 of those are people who are placed in care homes in Merton. Another 30 are placed in care homes elsewhere in southwest London, so Richmond, Wandsworth, Kingston, Sutton, Croydon. And then we've got 52 people who are placed outside of southwest London, so not in Merton, not in southwest London, but elsewhere in the country. And again, some of that relates to people with maybe perhaps complex needs who need a very specialist type of care provision, and there might only be a small number of those kinds of care homes in the country. So in essence, people are having to go quite big to be able to get the care and support that they need, particularly with more complex and specialist needs. But one of the things that we're keen to do is think about those 30 who are elsewhere in southwest London, those 52 who are out of southwest, placed outside of southwest London, and think about whether or not, if we created the right opportunities locally, those individuals might be able to move back to the area. That wouldn't be the right solution for everyone. There will be people who will have made very strong will have developed very strong communities where they're living now and wouldn't want to move back to Merton. But there might be others who still have family in Merton, who have friends in Merton, who might actually want to and benefit from a move back closer. So part of what we're thinking about in terms of our future supported housing provision, supported living provision, is does that create opportunities for people to move back more locally? So if I move on to supported living, again, we've got 102 placements. So Merton is supporting 102 people in supported living placements. 77 of those are in the borough, 17 are elsewhere in southwest London, and only 8 of those are outside of southwest London. So again, you can see from that supported living generally is a much more local solution for people. And I think that's one of the benefits of supported living. We're much more likely to be able to continue supporting people locally in supported living than might be the case in residential care. So that's a bit of data, and we'll be able to share these slides afterwards. So don't worry about kind of lots of numbers being thrown at me. I'm happy to share the slides, but I thought it was just helpful to give you a bit of context in terms of what the current position is in terms of the provision in the borough, but also who we're supporting and where we're supporting people, both from a residential and a supported living perspective. So moving on then to our our future plans. And these future plans are really about expanding the availability of supported living within the borough. And I'll explain how we're intending to do that in a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to also acknowledge that there are currently 3 supported living units in the borough where the care and support is currently provided by Choice Support. And that's a block contract, so that they provide all of the care for the up to 18 individuals who are living in those 3 schemes. And that contract comes to an end in the relatively near future. So we're currently in the process of procuring a new care and support provider to continue delivering service to those existing 18 units of supported living. And the new provider we expect to have in place in kind of March, April time, depending on some of the kind of practicalities of the tender process, the selection process. And why I'm mentioning this is because as part of that commissioning process, we've actually developed a new contracting model. And I think the way that we've developed that will help to answer some of the questions that people had about how people's different needs can be met, how people's needs can be met over time as they might change. Because what we've done is we've moved away from saying we want a block contract, so that effectively a one-size-fits-all arrangement, to a much more flexible model that is much more personalised to individuals and their specific care and support needs, and can be adapted over time as those care and support needs change. And in technical terms, we call that a core and spot model, but don't worry too much about the terminology. What matters is that instead of saying, right, we want to buy 1,000 hours of supported living a month, and the 18 people who receive that 1,000 hours will just get it divvied up between them and we'll work it out somehow. What we say is, actually, there are some core aspects of supported living. And we would expect all of the tenants in that particular supported living scheme to access that standard core support in a fairly equal manner. So that might be the management of the scheme, that might be waking night staff, that might be just having 1 or 2 staff on duty during the day to answer the front door, to deal with queries, to deal with visitors, etc., etc. Cleaning, those kinds of things that are just part of the infrastructure of the scheme, if you like, that just help the scheme to take over and to be clean and to be, kind of safe and so on. And then everything else, so all of the individual care and support that an individual will need is commissioned against a personalised support plan. So in the same way that if someone is, for example, getting home care in their own home, they might have a care and support plan that says we'll, an hour of support in the morning to help with preparing breakfast, an hour of support in the evening to help with preparing a healthy evening meal. That's all set out in a care and support plan, and the support provider in the scheme is required to deliver that individualised care and support. So that creates a much more, as I say, personalised and adaptable model, because it means that if someone is unwell for a period of time, for example, we can increase the amount of support that they get, but we're doing that in a way that means that we're just paying for that additional support for as long as it's needed, and then when the person recovers, we can take the support back down to the previous level. So we think it's a much more, as I say, personalised and much more adaptable model. And it's a model that we will want to use as the standard model for our supported living arrangements as we move forward. It also has the insignificant benefit of complying with what Care Quality Commissions say makes a supported living scheme and not a residential care scheme. Because one of the really important things that does is it provides choice for individuals. And it provides choice of provider for individuals. So in a traditional supported living scheme, you might have all of the care and support being provided by the same provider that provides the waking night staff, the management, the daytime cover, the cleaning, etc. With this model, it creates the potential, at least, for an individual to say, actually, I need 20 hours of care and support a week, but I want to get that care and support from an external agency while I'm living in my supported living setting. So I will get the core cover from the supported living scheme. I know that the communal areas will be cleaned. I know that there'll be somebody on site if I need a bit of help with doing a particular thing. But all of the personalised hours, all of the hours of care and support that I'm receiving as an individual, I want this external agency to provide for me. And that would be supported in this model. So the kind of situation where that might happen is if somebody was moving from home, say, into a supported living setting, and while they'd been living at home, they had a support package from a home care provider or from a specialist learning disability provider. And when they moved into supported living, actually what mattered to that individual was keeping that support, keeping those people they had a relationship with. This new model would allow that. So it would mean that, as I say, individuals can bring their own care and support with them or can choose an external agency. We know that in most cases, based on experience, people will be happy to get their care and support from the provider who's on site, because there are some kind of practical advantages to that. But it's important that we offer that option, that we offer that choice for people if that matters to them, if that's what's important to them. Moving on then to the broader kind of future plans. What we're in the process of doing is developing what's called a framework agreement. And that's essentially, again, a contractual mechanism that you don't need to worry too much about in terms of the kind of technical terminology. But what it means is that we will have different categories, probably based on different levels of complexity. So, from relatively low need for support through to very high need for support, so that we're selecting providers, for example, that have a track record of providing very high levels of support for individuals. That will be included as a category. And each of those agreed categories will include a number of providers. So we'll go through a process of saying, here are all of the requirements that we need you to meet as a provider. If you pass all of these requirements, if you answer our questions well enough, and if your price is within a pricing range that is suitable from our perspective, then we will include you in our framework agreement in the category that you've applied for. And once providers are on that list, they stay on that list unless there are particular things happen, which I'll come back to in a couple of minutes. Now, once we've got that arrangement set up, we will do two fundamental things with that. So if we have an individual who we identify that supported living is the right solution for through the assessment process, and where we've built a care and support plan that sets out what that individual's needs are and how they can best be met, then we will look at the right category on the framework agreement for that individual, and we'll say to that individual, here are the providers in that category. Here's where they're located, here's their addresses, here's some information about the kind of service that they provide. do you have a preference? And if that individual says, well, actually, yeah, I like the look of Acme Care and Support, because I'm going to college in Morden, and their house is in Morden, so it means I'll only have half a mile walk to college. That matters to me, so I want you to talk to them first about. I want you to introduce me to them first in terms of if they've got a vacancy, me taking on that vacancy, that tenancy, and we'll be able to do that. So even though providers will be ranked based on a tender score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter where a provider is in that ranking. If the individual has a preference for a particular provider, we'll be able to go straight to that provider, as long as the preference is based on a kind of rational decision. So as I say, it might be about location and kind of being close to other things that are important in your life, like college, or it might be about proximity to family. It might be about wanting to get away from family. You know, it could be any, as long as there's a kind of sensible, logical, rational decision, we will go to that preferred provider in the first instance. If the individual says, actually, I'm not that bothered, I know I want a supported living scheme, but I'm not worried about where it is in the borough or which provider it is, we would ordinarily go to the top ranked provider first and say, have you got a vacancy? Are you the right place for this individual? If yes, that would be the provider that would offer a tenancy and the care and support. If they say no, we'd go to the second ranked provider and so on down through the ranking. So in that sense, again, it's really important to just highlight that we're building in the fact that choice overrides competition, if you like. So we don't have to go to the top ranked provider if there is that clear preference for a different provider in that particular part of the framework. And the framework is likely to be set up with a 7-year duration, so it will be a long-term arrangement. So it's not something that we'll be doing for 2 or 3 years and then kind of doing something different. It's a long-term arrangement. But again, in terms of providing choice and increasing opportunities for people, we will every couple of years go through a process of reopening the framework. So existing providers won't have to reapply, but it will give an opportunity for new providers to come in and say, actually, we're now operating in Merton. We think we can meet all of your requirements. Here's how we think we can meet all of your requirements. And as long as they do meet all of the requirements, then we would add them into the framework, so they'd become a provider that we could use in the same way as existing providers. So that's for individually purchased placement. So where we have an individual who's right for supported living and we need to find the right opportunity for them, that's the process. But what we'll also use the framework to do is say, we might from time to time say to providers, actually, look, you as a group of providers, we've got, let's just say, for example, we've got 4 individuals who are all coming through, getting ready to leave college. They've all been to college together. They'd quite like to live together. Can you identify a suitable property, and could you provide the care and support at that suitable property for those 4 individuals? So effectively, the equivalent of almost like a shared house arrangement for young people moving on from education into a more independent setting. Or perhaps a group of older individuals who all at roughly the same time need to be living in a supported living type arrangement. Again, we could say to the providers, look, we've got 3 or 4 people. If you can find a property and you can demonstrate that you can provide the care and support, then let's get on and do that. So the framework will work both for individuals, but it will also work where we're looking to develop new schemes for groups of people. And it's again really important to highlight that it has that flexibility in it as an arrangement. You'll be pleased to hear I'm almost done, so that you can pick up any questions that you have. But I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the kind of quality things that we'll build into the process, and then I'm going to just finish by talking a bit about the next steps and where we want your help to make this the best possible arrangement. So obviously, in terms of kind of quality issues, the focus is on maximising independence. Supported living should be about supporting people to live as independently as possible, but recognising that that needs to be done within a framework that means that risk is managed for individuals. That doesn't mean that risk is removed, because we should all be able to take some risk in our lives, and we should all be able to choose and make decisions about the level of risk that we take. We know that individuals might need support with coming to those decisions about level of risk, but the focus is on, as I say, on maximising independence within a safe, risk-managed setting. And we will think about how we can strongly encourage providers to use technology to support that independence. So again, going back to what some of Angela was saying earlier about the connection between supported living and MASCOT and the use of technology and sensors and so on to help people to manage risk while maximising independence will be something that we'll want to focus on. In the main, supported living is registered service provision, so it's registered with CQC and regulated by CQC, the Care Quality Commission, and the Care Quality Commission, I'm sure most of you know, have a rating system for providers, and providers are either rated as inadequate, requiring improvement, good or outstanding, and we will be making a prerequisite for inclusion on our framework that a provider is at least good, so either good or outstanding. So if a provider requires improvement or is inadequate, they won't get through the initial stages of the selection process. If once the framework is up and running, we've got a provider that was good when they came onto the framework, but is inspected by CQC and drops their rating to, let's say, requires improvement, we would suspend them from the framework. That wouldn't mean that people would move out of, that wouldn't mean that existing tenants would move out of that scheme, unless it was so unsafe that we had to move people. But that would be incredibly unlikely, I think. But it would mean that we wouldn't make new placements into that scheme until we were satisfied that the provider had taken sufficient steps to improve the quality of the service that they were providing. So we'd be monitoring that and satisfying ourselves that they'd implemented the necessary improvements. And once that was done, we would then allow the provider to become live on the framework again, as it were, and we would then be able to use them to make new placements as and when necessary. What we wouldn't do is necessarily wait until the provider was given a good rating again by CQC, because actually, because of the way CQC inspect, that could take a number of years, and you might have a situation where a provider is actually operating very well and would be good or outstanding, but just hasn't been inspected yet, hasn't been re-inspected yet. So that would be a kind of local decision about, are we satisfied that they've made the necessary improvements? Once we are satisfied, we can start using them again. What we're also exploring, just as a kind of final point on this, is if you like, a reserve list. I'm not sure that that's quite the right term, but it's the best term I've come up with so far. Because it's possible to register as a supported living scheme with the Care Quality Commission, but until you've been inspected by the Care Quality Commission, you don't get a rating. So you can be registered but not yet inspected, which means no rating. So for those providers, they might be the best provider in the world, but because they haven't been inspected yet, they can't demonstrate that via their CQC rating. Now, we don't want to exclude providers simply because they haven't yet been inspected. So what we're looking at is how we might have a kind of, as say, a reserve list that would mean that those new providers might be an option, might be the best option for an individual, and we, because they're on a reserve list, we would be able to say to that individual, yes, actually, you can go and talk to that provider about whether they're the right option for you. Now, we need to do some work around how we would satisfy ourselves and assure ourselves that that new provider had the necessary skills, the necessary abilities, the necessary management arrangements in place to actually provide safe care. But there are ways of doing that, and we'll kind of do that in a way that's safe. But I think, again, just the important bit about that is that it means that we're not closing the market to innovative new providers who, as they might be offering a really high quality service. So in terms of next steps and the assistance that I think we're asking for, so we're starting we've got various internal processes that we have to go through before we can actually advertise the framework. So we're doing that, we're starting that process now. We expect that to be finished by around about April and May. So one of the things we will want to do in the fairly near future is do a follow-up session, and you know, before we finish today, I just want to talk a little bit about how we might invite people to be part of that session. But for anyone who wants to be part of a session, what we'd look to do is spend some time looking at specification, which is the kind of document that sets out all of the standards, all of the requirements, all of the expectations that we would have of providers in terms of quality of care, safety, all of those kinds of things. Now, I don't want to pretend for a second that we'd be starting with a blank piece of paper with that. We have a developed specification that's based on lots of national evidence, lots of London evidence about what works well in supported living schemes. So it's not like we'd be developing something from scratch, but we do think it's really important to test that with individuals with learning disabilities, with families, with other stakeholders, to say, actually, is there anything that we're missing here? Is there anything that we might want to give a bit more focus to? Is there anything that we think is not relevant? Those kinds of questions. So an opportunity to be part of that process is something that we're very keen to offer to you and would very much value input into. And then the next bit, and again, this is with the agreement of yourselves and with the forum, would be an opportunity to think through the questions that we might ask providers as part of the tender process. So typically in a tender process, we might ask 8 or 10 questions of providers, and they have to provide written answers explaining how they would respond to the scenario that we've presented, or how they would meet the requirements that we set out in that particular question. And I think there's a really good opportunity to think through with yourselves, anyone who's interested in being part of that process, and with the forum more broadly, and with kind of other partners, what those questions might be and what the answers we would expect in relation to those questions, because it's in a sense, it's fairly, well, it's not easy to come up with good questions. It's not difficult to come up with good questions, but what can be more difficult is actually being very clear about what you want that question to establish in terms of the kind of key things that the provider needs to be saying. So again, very much hoping that we can involve as many of you as want to be involved in that process. So that will happen in kind of parallel with our internal processes, so that if everything runs to schedule, we'd be expecting to advertise the tender in around about May, possibly June of this year. But obviously that's contingent on having all of the documentation complete, having all of the questions complete and so on. And if we need a little bit more time to get that right, I'm happy to give us that bit more time, because it's really important, I think, that we engage people in that process. We obviously then get tender responses in from providers, so we get the kind of responses to the questions that we've asked. And we then have to go through the process of effectively marking those responses in terms of how well they've met the requirements. And again, while that is quite a time-consuming and technical process, if there are people who want to be part of that process and who've maybe been involved in developing the questions and want to see it through to the next stage, then I'm very open to people from, representatives from Adults First being involved in that process of looking at those tender responses. And there are different ways in which we can do that, which we could talk about in more detail once we know who might want to be involved in that. And then again, in terms of kind of ongoing involvement, once the framework is set up, we will want to make sure that we're monitoring the quality of the services that are being provided. We'll want to make sure that the providers are complying with their contracts. And I think, so I know that there's a really good model in place in relation to the Vibrance respite provision that involves people with lived experience, families in the process of monitoring the quality of that service, and we'd want to replicate that across this wider set of arrangements. So again, an opportunity for people to be involved in that, but also an acknowledgement from me that actually that can be quite a time-intensive commitment over quite a long period of time. So no expectation in terms of people being involved, but the offer. Certainly that there is the opportunity to be involved for those who do want to have that longer term involvement. And that should be the end of my my slides. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you,